We're going to talk about building teams. We've got a bunch of different questions to go through here. I'll try to take notes as we go and dig deeper on some of the issues as they come up. But I want to start with something that is only somewhat related. I'd love to hear, and we'll just start with everybody here right now. Mamuna, tell me about something that happened today that brought a smile to your face.
Oh, wow. I would say my son, when I was cooking breakfast this morning, came running around the corner with a mask on that scared me halfway to being awake this morning, and then I had to laugh. So that was a good way to start the morning.
Very good. That's a charming story for sure. How about you, Jennifer? Smile of the morning.
I think your question did make me smile immediately, but before that, I think in the morning, I think it's my kids waking up and did what they promised. They made up their beds, and it was satisfying smile for sure.
Very good. And how would that compare to what you discovered when you went to work? Did those folks also make their beds and do all the things that they were supposed to do?
I think like meeting all the expectations that always bring a smile.
Awesome. And Fonz, how about you?
Well, we just got a new puppy. So this morning I took the puppy to my daughter's bed and put her on the bed and she licked her, and my daughter was startled, but then she had the biggest smile and then I had the biggest smile. So that was a great question.
Very cool. I'm going to direct the first question to Fonz in terms of our session today. How much time do you spend hiring? How important is it in terms of relative priority to everything else you do?
To me, it's important. I've been on a lot of the interview panels, but I wouldn't say it's the most important thing that I'm focused on. I would say I spend about 4 to 8 hours a week interviewing and reviewing candidates and writing up my notes after the interview. So I wouldn't say too much of my time, but definitely a couple hours a week.
So same question to you, Jennifer. When you think about the priority of hiring, maybe it's not about the hours, but how important is that in the sort of relative piece of team building?
Yeah, when I think about team building, I bucket kind of my responsibilities into people, product, and process. And I would say people definitely occupies, if not 30%, or more than that, in that bucket. And so within that, then yeah, I do spend a lot of high priorities on hiring just to make sure it's a long-term investment for the team, to make sure we have a good longevity of people and talents on the team to bring us to success in the other buckets, product and process.
Very cool. Mamuna, a little twist on that, in terms of the balance between product and process and people, so Jennifer's added a couple more dimensions to this in terms of team building. How do you think about the process piece? How important is that? Is Kickstarter a particularly process-oriented place?
Yeah, I would say that traditionally, no, but more and more as we look to become more efficient, deliver impact and value, process is a natural part of that, at least at Kickstarter. And so more and more we're understanding where not to add process for the sake of having process, but where it makes sense, where maybe things are falling down or we're doing the same thing multiple times, just really codifying that for people so they understand, what is it when they're coming on board they can expect. We found a lot of times that when people start, they have those like basic questions and everyone articulates it in a different way. So giving people a standard way of understanding how we may do a certain thing has been helpful as we especially look at bringing on more people to the team.
Right. Yeah, it's always tricky, as the sort of host here. I don't want to put my finger on the scale too much. At Reddit, I spend a huge amount of my time on recruiting. And to some degree, I will admit it's a form of laziness. I know that if I bring in really wonderful, talented people, that my job just gets easier and easier, and our capacity to do greater and greater things goes up. And in my estimation, I think it's more so than what happens, by focusing on process and other things. So I really think that talent is kind of at the cornerstone of what I think about when we build teams. When we talk about talent, and just for everybody here, a little bit of behind the scenes, the four of us met before this. And so we've had an opportunity to have a sort of pre-discussion and questions on this stuff before. So I'm going to reference some of those questions as we go through this. One of the questions that came up was about how long people are spending at companies. And we compare and contrasted, people who are at companies for a super short period of time, all the way up to, I think we had an example of someone who had been at a company for 8 years, and how we as hiring managers thought about them differently or comparatively. Jumping to Jennifer now, how do you look at candidates and their tenure as a part of building the team? And then as a follow-up question to that, how do you think about that for the team that you've got?
Sure. So I would say when I do hiring, I'm cautious of the tenure they had, especially for those with shorter time, like 1 year, 2 years, and hopping over to multiple companies. I would question more on what are they doing for the company, the contribution, are they long-term successes, or are they striving for more short-term success so that they could build up their resumes? So those would be things I would call out to me. For people with longer tenure, I would first kind of like kudos to the company if this is a strong talent to be able to keep this person in this company for so long. But I would also try to make sure that ask them what is the next challenge they're looking forward to make sure that when they're going to my team or to this company, that they have found and identify and work along with those next level challenges for them to expand their roles. To your second questions for my team, well, I think goes back to, admiring for those companies can keep talent in their team and company for so long. I think it is important to make sure we retain as long as we can, but also be able to acknowledge that, there's probably so many senior or principal product managers I can have on my team. We can't make everyone into high level individual contributors. So there is going to be a point where we need to recognize it's probably a time we need to hopefully do more internal transfer within the company, or just have those coaching conversations to see what's the next best step for this person.
My recollection, Fonz, is that you had a slightly different take, on this issue. What are your thoughts about tenure, both within your team, but also in terms of folks that you might be bringing in or hiring new?
I think people moving from company to company is actually a good thing if they're moving because they're getting more opportunities. So I do think when somebody's not at a company for a long time and they can't explain why they're shifting companies, that's not really that exciting. I think someone who's been at a company for a long time, I would want to understand, has the company constantly been challenging enough to allow them to stay that long? Or was that more of content? Because it just seems like now there's so many opportunities, not that I wouldn't want an employee to be loyal to a company, but there's so many opportunities for people in this space right now to not have decided to take another opportunity would just make me want to understand, is that company that good? And if so, why are you leaving now if you've been there for 8 years? So me as someone who has not stayed at a company for 5 or 8 years, I kind of understand why someone would maybe stay at a company for a shorter time frame if they were able to move on to get some kind of a promotion, or if that current company stopped offering what they were trying to do.
I think it's super interesting. I want to dig in on that question, but I want to bounce it over to Mamouna. One of the things that I hear from folks is that career opportunity really only happens when you move from company to company. That once you're in a company, you're looking at 2%, you're on some kind of career ladder, the opportunities come more slowly. How do you think about that for Kickstarter? Is that something that you worry about? How do you keep up with the sort of competitive aspect of someone may love to stay or want to stay at Kickstarter, but they look over at Netflix and they go, oh man, if I bounce to Netflix, I'm going to get an 8% jump, and there's a title increase, and that's an opportunity.
Yeah, so speaking of myself personally, I can definitely say that I have done that. I've moved for opportunity. At Kickstarter, being that I'm in a leadership position, my goal is to get ahead of people. So in building relationships and understanding what people are trying to achieve, creating a path for them that is challenging, that's engaging, and then also giving them the opportunity to actually get there is important. I think also understanding that people are making jumps. They're trying to go to other companies to find, those jumps in pay and increases. It's important to understand that up front and plan for that, and have those conversations to understand what are the expectations of people on your team. I definitely can't sit here and say that I've always been able to hit that mark and provide everyone what they ask for, but I think in having that understanding of where a person's trying to go and what they're trying to achieve, they may not feel that they have to abruptly leave for an opportunity. There may be an opportunity to have a conversation about what it is that they're trying to achieve and what they're expecting, and then potentially how you can help them get there. It may not be that you have to do it immediately. Maybe you can work together on a plan to get there, depending on the type of relationship you have. But I would say that from my personal experience, I have definitely done that. But I think that, understanding how I've done it, I try to approach that just openly with people, and asking them earlier on, what do you want to do after Kickstarter? What does that look like for you? And how do I create opportunities to keep you engaged while you're here, keep you learning, keep you interested? And I think that's what helps to hopefully retain some people.
I think the idea of asking people what they want to do after Kickstarter is a great one. I do that oftentimes with people who have just joined. How is this a step on the next thing that you want to do? And I think sometimes people are shocked by that a little bit, like, wait, are you trying to get rid of me? And no. But I want to acknowledge from the outset, this is going to be one step in a path. You're not going to be at Reddit forever. We want you to be a superstar during the period that you are at Reddit. But, if I can help you to grow to the next step, and the next piece is for you to go to Workday, or the next piece is for you to go to Kickstarter, that might be a wonderful opportunity for you. Jennifer, you said something about, we want to retain people as long as we can. I want to stretch that out into a question for Mamouna. How do you balance that retaining people as long as you can with, and I'll assert a value, maybe you'll disagree with the value. New voices on the team seems such like an important part of us just maintaining a connection to consumers and some sort of semblance of reality and getting away from groupthink. So how do you balance long-term retention versus the value of new voices?
Yeah, both are important. I think that there is like a weird, delicate balance that you have to approach. I think it's important as you bring any person onto your team, thinking about what it is that they bring to your team. So what kind of voice, what kind of perspective, what do they offer your team that maybe someone else is not offering? So thinking about the diversity and perspective. And then long term, that person hopefully continues to offer that voice, that perspective, and you all continue to find value in that. I do think that after some time, like let's say that your company, if it's pivoting in a direction or you need new, fresh perspective, you do want to still have that perspective, but you may also want now to bring in new perspective. And so I think that it's finding that balance and also reminding people, like I like to have conversations with individuals on my team talking about, where I see them bringing value and asking them where they think they're bringing value, and then reminding them to continue to bring that to the table as we're having discussions, as we're thinking through problems, helping them mature their perspectives, helping them, broaden their horizons. But I think having those perspectives are important, fresh and existing to whatever it is that you're building, because they can also help contextually inform a person who is coming in with some amount of fresh eyes so they can understand how to place their perspective with the team.
So Jennifer, I want to have you respond to that, since I started out with sort of part of one of your quotes there. You talked about retaining people for as long as possible. How do you think about that, especially in light of some of the things Mamouna shared?
Yeah, I do agree with what Mamouna shared. I will add a bit more of the dimensions where I think if especially when the product or the project is more in a more high growth state or an early stage, I would say new voices is most important. But at the same time, the converse, if it's more about maintenance or re-architecture, you probably want to make sure you have the people who knows it very well, so that they can continue to build on and not to lose sight of what we need to support from historic purposes. That said, I would say if there's not enough headcount or anything to add more people to it, and you do have been successfully retaining a good team of folks, I would try to stretch them to bring in new perspectives. Doesn't have to be a new person, but it's just more stretching these individual contributor by connections. So can you invite them to meet more people outside of their common circles? Could be through like UXDX and meeting all these fabulous folks who's listening to this, or it could be other conferences out there, or just even within the company, like talk to newer people out there and have them make those connections to bring perspectives in. So try to do that as if there's no more headcount for new voices, but I do definitely treasure the people from external coming in and bringing their own perspectives.
So I want to bounce to some of the questions that we are getting in chat here real quick. There's one from Stephanie, and she says, I am the only UX designer for my product. What advice for making a case to hire more talent? So going from one to some greater number, how would you advise Stephanie? Fonz.
That's a great question. And I've been in that position before as the founding designer, where you end up doing so many different things that I don't think you're as productive as you would like. You do get things done, so you check the boxes off. But if you're constantly putting out fires, it's kind of hard for you to work on the bigger projects. So I think this is a perfect time for Stephanie to start to talk to her product manager, if she has a product manager, her design manager, her design director, leadership in the company, to understand what the roadmap, what the next 6-12 months would look like, and explain that it's going to be hard to get all of that done just by herself. If she brings in help, then everybody wins that way. So I think right now it's a form of communication of saying, I'm doing the best I can and we are making progress, but I know the company always wants to move faster. Everybody wants to move faster. Having this other resource would allow me to either continue doing what I'm doing, or we can have this person think about new ideas that we have. But for the growth and for the sake of the team, hiring is always good. So I would say focus on communicating with leadership, but explaining that this is more toward you wanting to be even more productive than you just need help because you can't get the stuff done.
Yeah, I'll say, I know we're hiring at Reddit, and I'm betting these folks are too. So if you're getting stuck as the only designer there and it's a big pile of work and you're not getting any collaboration or help, we certainly have opportunities. Going to another question here from the chat. Mamuna, how do you target best-in-class people? How do you find, the really top talent?
Yeah, I mean, so honestly, I kind of feel like that's subjective. I think that it really comes down to what it is that you're trying to build. And I believe that while a person may not have the exact experience you are looking for, they may be they may bring something to the table. And I think there's best in class talent, but there's also like gems in people who maybe have a lot of potential but just haven't been given the opportunity. So I try to create a balance in what I look for, because oftentimes when you do find a person who's looking for that right opportunity, they just knock it out of the park. And, I think those folks go on to really thrive. And so, I think it's a balance. I think that you have to kind of look at your team and understand where the organization is, what it can support. If you're bringing in a person who maybe hasn't done it before, you want to make sure you have those stronger individuals on the team to be able to help just support them through the process and ensure that they are successful in the work that they're doing. So it is a balance, in my opinion, what you want to attract on your team.
Yeah. Jennifer, what's your take on that one?
Yeah, I would say being patient during hiring is probably important. As much as you want to hire as soon as possible, so you can kind of shoulder up all those added responsibilities, it could be times where you just do need to, go back to after round 3 and all candidates can't make it, or to go back to square one and start all over again. So having that patience to go through all that is important. I also highly look into referrals. I think this is where you have people who you trust who can refer you to people who they think would be successful in these roles. Those are ways, those I do give additional attention to when it comes to hiring.
So looking at that same question, Fonz, and I think that there's something that cropped up here. How do you figure out who is the right candidate? So we talked about talent, we talked about where you go to find them. How do you, when you get to the end of that process and it's like, this is the right candidate, what's that moment? How do you figure that out?
That's a tricky question because you really won't know that it's the right person until they get into the position and they start working. But a preliminary right to me would be if the candidate has went through the whole team and the team panel is diverse, where you have your design team, you have your product manager, you have your engineers, you have your data scientists, because we all think differently and we all ask different kind of questions and we're all responsible for different things. So when you have a candidate that was able to, in a short time frame, explain themselves and build that kind of connection with that many different people in this space who are all intelligent and passionate about the company, I think that's a really good sign. And then second, I'm just really big on somebody being just a good person in general. And I think that comes from being able to have conversations that might not just be super technical about design. It may be just trying to learn that person and understand who they are and what they do, their hobbies, things they like. And I think by having a balance of both of those together with the right questions, you can kind of get a good inkling and a little bit of the experience, like you said, Lowell. Like, I know you're more of a talent versus experience type of person, but the experience is like the icing on the cake to all of those things for me to really be able to feel like this is the right person.
Well, it's funny you bring that up. I was going to +1. See, you guys are on opposite sides, Mamuna and Fonz here for my screen. I was going to +1 on what Mamuna was saying, where, you know, we really do try to believe that people can pick up that experience and that the exact relevant experience is weirdly like the hardest thing to look for, and it screens out a number of really talented folks who maybe don't make a contribution the way you would like the first week, but if we're realistic, within a month, within a quarter, you know, within a half a year, they may outstrip because there's more opportunity for them to grow than other candidates that come in with the perfect amount of experience. I was talking to a number of candidates recently who said, you know, I've been interviewing at places and they say, if you haven't been working on a CMS for financial services, then we're not interested in hiring you. And I think those companies are losing out on people who can learn the specifics of that area of business and may bring great talent in the ability to design. We certainly have a long history of multi-talented designers who did architecture and furniture and all different kinds of things that weren't just their narrow area of, you know, training or expertise. So I love to see people who are talented. We focus first and foremost on the portfolio, and we proactively try to go out and look at people's portfolios, you know, whether we are receiving inbound sort of interest from people. We look at the portfolio before we look at resume, but certainly before we look at a name or a photograph or anything like that. We really think about it as a blind audition, an opportunity to look at their work and let the work stand for itself. And we try to do the same thing outbound as well, as go, you know, look at people's portfolios and let that be the most important thing. It's been a really great way of unlocking talent that might not have thought to apply, or that recruiters might not have thought to go look for because they didn't work at the right company or have the right keyword, you know, in their resume. And it's been a great source of talent for us. I think it's a competitive advantage. I probably shouldn't tell you. So moving on a little bit, there's lots of questions I think that I'm getting from candidates these days about moving from physical to virtual, now back to something. So I'd love to start with Jennifer here. What are you guys doing with teams and team building sort of as more people get vaccinated and as circumstances change?
Yeah, that's definitely on my radar too, as we are now opening up for more. I am planning for some outdoor activities for my team. For over a year, we haven't really met in person. So that's something we're planning to do. But that's it for real work outside of team bonding. I think we are also kind of redefining, given all the learnings we had in the past year, we all learned how to do Zoom more efficiently and effectively and not to drain each other and all those. How do we kind of find balance between those who really prefer to work more from home versus those in offices, but yet are we still able to have those team building and fostering collaboration virtually when there are going to be some part of people who are going to be remote. So we're still ironing out and learning on the fly, but I don't think it's going to be healthy if we have enforced something top down and say this is the approach. It's something where we need to be more open on the how we want to do it.
How about Kickstarter? What's going to be the approach there?
Yeah, we're still discussing internally what we want to do. We have no plans to go back into the office until January 2022. But the thing that we've heard a lot of, so a lot of folks moved to different areas during this time. And so our goal is not to be disruptive. I think in whatever we do, we'd likely would be remote first and just being more mindful of our folks, our team members who are wherever they are. And I think that we've learned a lot over the past year, as I'm sure everyone has, in how to conduct ourselves virtually. So just putting in some best practices to ensure that we're creating that standard of work to ensure that everyone feels supported in a meaningful way. And I think, when it comes to engaging with the team, I remember, earlier on in the pandemic, it was kind of awkward because you're trying to quickly figure out, how do I keep my team engaged? Are they engaged? Are they working? What's going on? And you get like these messages from people like, hey, how's it going? Hey, good morning, and people trying to like find a way to create presence, on Slack. And after some time, you're like, oh, I'm working, I'm just going to do what I'm doing. And you start to understand that you have flexibility in your approach and rhythm. And as a manager, you're learning to say, okay, I trust that my team is doing X, Y, and Z, and I don't have to, tell them good morning every day. But I think that, as we approach things reopening and finding ways to bring people together, we're trying to figure out, level of comfort for people, trying to make it so that we don't exclude people intentionally, and we still create spaces for people to come together. Yeah.
Rather than just ask the same question again to everybody, Fonz, when you think about back to the office, what's going to be the biggest thing you're going to miss from remote, and how do you then try to replicate that again?
That's going to be tricky because the answer that I'm going to give is pretty selfish. I'm going to just miss having access to my family the way that I do. I'm fortunate enough to work from home comfortably, where I have an office separate from the rest of the house. But every time my daughter comes in from school, she can run into my office and say, hey, Dad, whether I'm in the meeting or not, being able to see my wife. So the family side, I think, is what I'm going to miss selfishly. From the work side, I don't really see missing that much. I really feel my team has done a great job of working over video conferencing. I do understand, well, now I understand, because before I was completely not understanding why people would want to come back into the office. There is something special about getting in the same room with people, and it's not always just to do work stuff. I was even talking to someone about, to me, it made more sense for people to go into the office to do one-on-ones so you can get that bond. And we do all our big 20, 50, 60 people meetings, keep doing those remotely, because there is something in the power of the physical connection. So I'm going to miss my family working from home. And then the flexibility, I think, being a designer, being able to work whenever I want, whether it's 2 a.m, 5 p.m, whether it's Saturday, whenever, I think I can handle that freedom and that responsibility. So I'm going to miss that if I have to start worrying about commuting and who's picking up my daughter from school and things like that.
I will admit to being a little bit terrified about the hybrid model that I think a lot of companies are thinking about. I think when everybody was in the office, we all collaborated, people sat in the same space, just the ability to work together was, really exciting for people and really creative and really collaborative. I think everybody being online, we've worked out how to do that, and the team has been really fantastic and just a really great set of people. The coordination of some people being hybrid, some people being remote, I'm concerned about how team cohesion and collaboration actually diminishes in that hybrid environment. And I think if I had a choice, I'd continue working from home and just go to an all virtual setup. I do think that there's also an interesting twist on that about the open office plan, right? Like you said, I have a space that I can go to and work, which is not a privilege that I get when I am at the office or that any of the designers get. And I suspect that the productivity and type of work will actually decline because of that loss of quiet space. Anybody want to jump in on that one?
I would say there's definitely quiet time and quiet space that I agree definitely values. But I feel as part of the product team that we do need to talk to people a lot, and I think the work is also being powered through the connections and relationships and bondings that happens underneath all of that. So if we are going to be doing hybrid, I think we are still going to focus on keeping those. But one thing I do remember, even before COVID, where we had remote workers who are in like Europe and everywhere else, one thing to avoid is to neglect those who are remote and not have those side chats after the meeting or continue the meeting after Zoom is done. I think those are deliberate things we need to make sure to support an effective hybrid. But going 100% virtual for the quiet space, I think we will still need to figure out if maybe find some opportunities where you can really be in person to make up for those bonding activities.
Very good. I think we want to come back to this one, but we've so far talked a little bit about hiring and how you think about identifying talent. We've talked a little bit about the workspace and sort of what's going to be the future there. Sort of returning to the team building, I want to key off of something that Jennifer said probably about 15 or 20 minutes ago. You talked about if you don't have the headcount to bring new voices, you mentioned like how do you bring new perspectives into the team. I think it's a really great insight, but what about actually changing the people? If you've got sort of a zero-sum game, is there ever a circumstance where you might have someone who's an okay performer, but it's still the right thing for the team to shake things up a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be interesting. I think we will need to be more trickier than hiring, I would say, where if you want to swap people around, you need to find two interested people in separate teams who are interested to grow into different areas. And for that, I think that would be far more tricky in that way, but I wouldn't dismiss it. I think it's a great idea. Another thing we do here at Workday, we recently, just end of last year, supported this new function called Gig, which is where all employees at Workday were allowed to carve a percentage of your time, depending on what your conversation with the manager is, to kind of join another project. So I can put up a gig and say we need 3 designers and 2 PMs. And anyone in Workday could apply for those roles. So it's something where we could also do it that way. And maybe through those connections and learnings and working together experiences, hopefully that will open the door for swapping positions permanently.
So Mamuna, same kind of question, but I mean, I think we're talking about a zero-sum kind of circumstance here. And so a lot of the tech industry is growing all the time, but in that sort of zero-sum tight headcount, how do you either up-level the team or bring new perspectives to the team?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with an understanding of what it is that you're missing on the team. And I think from there, I would communicate that transparently with the team. I would say, here's where we're trying to go, here's what we're trying to accomplish and achieve. I would then work with each person to understand or create a plan to understand what they can bring to that gap that we are missing. And I think, in those conversations, a lot of times you can align with the person and say, this is something I'm interested in, or maybe it's something they're not interested in. But I think when you think about a fair approach, I never want to make the assumption that someone's not capable of filling that gap or being able to do the thing that we're trying to accomplish. They just may not know that is what we're trying to do. So I think the first thing is really articulating what it is that we're trying to accomplish that the team is maybe not accomplishing today, or an individual is not accomplishing today, and giving the team or that individual an opportunity to accomplish it if they're interested in doing so. And I think, from there, you take it depending on, whatever it is that you work out with that person. But as a person that's been laid off, I try not to take the extreme unnecessarily. I like to try to bring clarity to what it is that I'm asking, and hoping that a person can kind of work to get there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good lead in to a question from Rory in the chat earlier, and I'll send it to Fonz. There's been lots of reports lately about Amazon and how managers are gaming the Amazon system by hiring people that they intend to essentially manage out later, simply as a way of hitting their manage out quota. How do you think about intentional turnover? Is there such a thing as intentional turnover? And is there a commentary on that Amazon approach that you would care to share?
Intentional turnover, no, like I've never heard of that. Honestly, we don't practice that at Netflix. We would prefer to have people stay as long as possible. So to hire someone to intentionally, to know that you're going to lay them off, I feel like that is an awful culture. So this is new to hear that. I mean, and if that's a practice that Amazon is participating in, I would rethink that, especially if you're trying to hire new people, because if that gets out, which is obviously out because we're talking about it, that's not something that you want floating around in the recruiting circle. At Netflix, we practice freedom and responsibility, and that works for us. We're a very culture-centric company, and we try to stay away from practices like that. So I think that's really what I would say is that is a awful practice, because you're setting this person up. This person may think their life is about to change because they're getting this job where you already are counting them out in the future. So that would be my commentary of don't practice that, and we don't practice that at Netflix.
I couldn't agree more. I think it brings up an interesting question of just your brand in regards to hiring. And so, Jennifer, how do you think about intentionally managing your hiring brand and making people excited about wanting to come to Workday? Obviously, we've talked about how people might not want to be excited about going to Amazon because of a perceived hiring practice, or at least rumors of a hiring practice. What do you do at Workday to build up your hiring brand?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing I would put forward first is the culture, and not just to talk about it, but just to present it, even if it's a short 30 or 45-minute interview, to kind of living as an example to show what the culture is. And so it goes back to some of the things that Fonz mentioned, when you're doing hiring, like what questions you ask, not just focused on professional skill sets and capabilities, but also sharing things about yourself, the fun side, the personal side. And I also share stories I have with Workday, like going through 2 pregnancies with Workday and still be able to promote after I came back from maternity leave. Stories like this just kind of live by the culture to make people understand that it's not just about work. Workday cares for you as a person. And so I think those are things I would use to share what it means to be working in Workday.
That's great. So I've got the 2-minute warning here in the chat from Jovi. Thank you for that and for keeping us on time. I think that for the last question, I actually want to turn to you guys about asking each other a question. And so, Mamuna, do you have a question you would like to ask any of the rest of us?
I don't know. I mean, I think that oh, this is like a challenging one. I did not expect this. No, it's okay. It's okay. I think, oftentimes when we get into the roles that we're in after we've had a bit of time to like, we're more seasoned in our roles, I guess. I'm curious for the group, you know, as a person who's coming into like new into their career and starting out, what is it that you would say to yourself that would maybe resonate with folks who are starting out in their career?
Yeah, I can go. Great question. What I've been telling some of my mentees and other people that are transitioning into design is, I think you should be less focused on the company you want to land at and spend more time understanding the industry. And there's other companies in that space where most people want to come into the space and say, I want to work at Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, or Google. And there's tens of thousands of other companies out there that are just as innovative, as amazing. So I would tell my old self to focus on the company and focus more on the industry and the problem that needs to be solved in that industry.
Yeah, I hate to have the last word, but you know, as the moderator, I'll take the answer there too, and we'll wrap things up, I think. So I'm going to build on top of what Fawn said. I actually think about this sort of framework and this quadrant diagram. So think about like a 2x2, and on one axis you have immature to mature, and on the other axis you have small to large. And I think in each one of those quadrants, you can map all the companies in the world onto those quadrants, and it does a pretty good job of describing for you as a designer what your role is going to be like and how that's going to work. And we've seen some of that in the chat today. If the company is small and immature, it's probably a startup. It probably means that you're one of only a couple of designers that are there. And from a portfolio perspective, it's really exciting, right? You've got the hat and the t-shirt and the mobile website and, you know, everything in between, but you're probably not going to have a brand that's going to open doors for you in your career. You're not probably getting mentorship, and you're probably not getting comped in a way that is necessarily in relationship to your talent. If I look at companies that are like small and mature, I think that those are tough, right? Because that's maybe a family business or a boutique brand. It's not necessarily growing. It's been around for a long time. They make great clients, but it's a tough place, I think, to be as a designer and really grow over a period of time. If I think at companies that are large and mature, I sometimes think that that's like entering a kind of machine, right? Like I spoke with someone recently who works for a very large e-commerce company, and along with 4 designers, like their job is just working on one portion of the checkout page. And this person has spent 3 years doing that. And so those companies, I think, can be a place that your portfolio goes to die, and the scope of the projects you work on are really small, but you certainly get comp, you get mentorship, and there are brands that are going to open doors for you subsequently in your career. Selfishly, my advice that I give everyone is go to somewhere that is large but immature, where you're a part of writing the story of that company. There's still a diversity of work. It's probably going to be a brand that might open some doors for you in your career. And I think what's interesting is most of the companies here and the folks that we're talking to today do fall into that quadrant. Maybe Netflix is a little bit on the big side, but for the rest of us, you know, I think that's where the exciting design jobs are. So that's my sort of final pitch. Thank you, everybody, for taking time today to spend with us. It's been a lot of fun talking to you.